Hello everyone, my name is Alex from Rainy Day Gaming, and not that it's a secret, but I've been a fan of the Kingdom Hearts series for a very long time. Some of my earliest memories were of playing the very first one with a couple of friends. I also remember hearing Simple and Clean play on a TV commercial a year later, which led to me begging my parents for a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Chain of Memories. And now the years have passed, friends have come and gone, I've worked jobs I've hated for years, had relationships, and despite being in my mid-20s, I have gray hairs. But still, I get a familiar sensation of inner joy and nostalgia whenever I hear something about Kingdom Hearts. Maybe it's a new trailer, screenshot, a new mechanic has been revealed, or even just crackpot theories. But it always gives me that giddy feeling of being a kid again. As 2019 ushered in, Kingdom Hearts 3 had a solid release date. It was within 1 year, then 1 month, then 1 week, no delays in sight. I waited in line for a late night release. There were other people there prattling on about how they've played all the games for the first time, getting ready for the new one. I was alone. This felt like a very personal and surreal experience I had to go through by myself. I just kind of stood there and waited through the seconds, and finally, they started handing out the copies. Everyone had already paid, so it was a smooth, easygoing process. A bag was handed to me, and I just kind of walked out without even looking. Got to my car, and drove home. Sure enough, there it was in my hand. I remember just kind of laughing because this moment had been memed to death, being compared to the likes of Half-Life 3, and I kept waiting for this oddly boring dream to just kind of end, but it never did, and I started what was to be the end of an era. Now, I should mention this is a review, and although I'm new at this, I won't use that as an excuse here. I'm going to be upfront and very professional for this video, avoiding spoilers, removing rose-tinted glasses, and trying to lock up my nostalgia. I'll be talking about the presentation, the gameplay, minor story points that are addressed early on, and some gripes I had with the game. And then finally, a rating. A video will be uploaded later on that will contain my unadulterated opinions, thoughts, overall stream of consciousness. That will be a little more freeform and will be incredibly spoiler heavy, especially addressing the ending and my thoughts on what will happen in future installments. Because after this game makes all of the money and makes Disney a very happy future overlord of the planet, there's going to be future installments. So with all the introductions out of the way, let's get to it. First up is the presentation. Kingdom Hearts has literally never looked better graphically. There is so much polish and talent being showcased here. I'm almost not even mad my stream of this game got flagged for copyright infringement because YouTube thought I had uploaded the movie Rapunzel to it. The lighting and effects have been cranked up to 11, and a combination of Disney CG-inspired graphics and Square Enix flair give a genuine feeling of authenticity that just makes me grin as I play through it. Some of the minute details really got to me. The frontrunner being the fact that Sora's Keyblade shows signs of heating when using certain magic. Little details like this are things that no one would have batted an eye at if it wasn't included, but the fact that they did should be applauded and talked about more. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating this, but I'm not even a detail-oriented person, and it was just something I felt should be mentioned. Depending on the world, the style even changes, with a trip to the Caribbean world later on in the game looking very realistic, while still somehow keeping the charm of Sora, Donald, and Goofy looking relatively the same without them feeling out of place, as they kinda did in Kingdom Hearts 2. The importance of the music in Kingdom Hearts cannot be understated and is one of the things that stick with fans most even years later. Another huge selling point is the main themes for the game, sometimes being used as semi-anthems to some fans. Hikaru Utada's Face My Fears does not disappoint. Special mention to Skrillex, who contributes a very well done remix that adds some extra flair to it. The original song has a haunting piano intro that then has its intensity ramped up throughout the rest of the song, with Utada's vocals starting slow and soft and becoming more emotional and more confident. This has an effect on the player that gives them a feeling that even though the road ahead is going to have some difficulties to it, they can and will get through it, which in of itself is just a very good lesson to learn. Yes, the main theme of each of the games is important, but what about the in-game stuff? Well, still amazing as usual. A lot of it has come from previous games, but it doesn't overstay itself, and there is still plenty of new stuff that takes center stage here. If I had to sum up the music in a sentence, it would be familiar with a new take. If Kingdom Hearts was a genre of music, then nothing in 3 seems out of place here. I'm not a musically trained person, and have been told that I am tone deaf by certain loved ones who will remain unnamed. but I know music is subjective and certain songs have an emotional hold over certain parts of our hearts. So at the end of the day, I can just say I enjoyed and would recommend listening to it. I will say that my favorite use of the music is using an attraction ride attack, something I'll be going over later, and one of my favorite OG themes from the first game playing, that being the Traverse Town battle theme. Something I want to go over real quick is the voice acting, and just really my first thoughts on it. For the most part, it works. The original characters sound good. Kairi got a new voice actor, and it is noticeable. It's fine, but it is noticeable. And finally, some of the Disney characters do not sound like they're supposed to. Woody and Buzz stick out with this pretty far. At least to me, they don't sound anything close to how they did in the movies. Also, just want to mention Phil from the Olympus Coliseum world. He doesn't speak, like at all. He says nothing. In Kingdom Hearts 2, he greets Sora, Donald, and Goofy exuberantly and jokes with them a little bit while talking back to their past. Here he gives a head nod. Just a head nod, that's it. Okay, I guess. Again, these are just things I noticed, but it took me out for a minute. It strangely bothered me. Not enough to really dampen my experience, but if I noticed, I'm sure lots of people did. Next up, we have the combat for Kingdom Hearts 3. It doesn't come as much of a surprise that it controls like an action RPG like the previous entries before it. You button mash the attack command while occasionally using your dodge or block abilities in order to not take unnecessary damage. But while that is mostly still the same here, there is a ton of options for approaching combat in a multitude of different ways. The main new mechanic and how the player is going to access the, in my opinion, coolest attacks is by building up a kind of action gauge right above the command menu. As you attack enemies, this will fill up and unlock different commands that are accessible through the triangle button, at least on the PS4. This is the main gimmick that then trickles down into the other mechanics. One of my favorite changes to the series is to the all-important Keyblades. Oftentimes, as you're playing through the past games, your initial Keyblade falls to the wayside in order to make room for the Keyblades with higher stats, and sometimes sillier appearances. I'm looking at you, Sweet Stat Keyblade from Birth by Sleep. However, with the introduction to the Keyblade Forge, you can use materials picked up through your adventure in order to upgrade the Keyblades you enjoy using. This gives the player going into the final fight the ability to use the initial Kingdom Key without intentionally gimping themselves, which I actually did. In addition to being able to upgrade the stats of each Keyblade, it goes a step more, giving unique abilities to each Keyblade called form changes. After building up that all-important gauge I mentioned before, your Keyblade can enter into a form change that offers combos and abilities unique to that Keyblade that are both cinematic and very useful from a combat perspective. For variety's sake, you have the ability to switch Keyblades on the fly, and this offers a lot of options for higher skill cap play. My personal favorite Keyblades were the Kingdom Key, the Shooting Star, and Wheel of Fate, which are the ones I'm using in the video footage being played right now. Shot locks make a return from Birth by Sleep, offering a ranged attack that slows down time as you lock onto enemies. This uses focus, which is a resource that has a little bit of a slower recharge rate. A fun system that also changes depending on which Keyblade you are using, giving even more incentive to use different Keyblades and find your own style of combat. Due to the slower recharge rate of this particular technique, I tended to use magic more often, but when I used shot locks, I was very happy to have them to fall back on. They are also useful for traversing the much larger open worlds, as it comes jam-packed with a kind of blink move that was rare to use but worth mentioning. Magic is nothing new to Kingdom Hearts, but I have to say it is ridiculously fluid now. Being able to cast spells while moving is a major improvement, and as your magic gets stronger in the later worlds, it can get real flashy looking, and it gets borderline overpowered with the right setup. The gauge I mentioned earlier fills up with the use of magic and can grant access to the Grand Magic commands, which are incredibly powerful, sometimes room-clearing spells that don't require MP but can only be accessed using that built-up gauge. Kingdom Hearts as an RPG places a slight emphasis on party members. While you do a majority of the fighting yourself, you have your vibrantly clad companions running back up with supporting attacks, magic, and tossing valuable heals your way occasionally, of course. Kingdom Hearts 3 no longer has you bench one of your party members in order to play through the world with its story-centric characters, as you can now have up to 4 members in your party at any given time. With these new party members comes teamwork abilities that include Sora teaming up with a given party member and performing an attack that causes significant damage. This also slows down everyone outside the little cinematic and provides valuable invincibility frames for all you pro-level speedrunners out there. Not much left to say on these, however, it brings me to my next point. So, Sora, Donald, and Goofy can pull Disney World rides into their dimension and use it to destroy the beings of darkness with the powers of fun. These are called attraction ride command. And well, Kingdom Hearts has never exactly been subtle, so this doesn't feel totally out of place. Yet another way to mix up the combat and bring a more colorful and cinematic element to it. They're fun minigame based attacks that can also grant some semblance of damage reduction. While they do sometimes feel out of place in the more serious battles, this is pretty consistent with our lovable goofball heroes who have always relied on smiles and friendship to overcome adversity. That about covers most of the new mechanics for combat, so we'll talk about how they changed the old stuff. First up, summons. Besides the fact that they're called links now, they're not very different. They can only be used with a full MP bar and bring a friend to Sora's aid where they then team up to combat their enemies. With the exception of one I used for nostalgia-based reasons, I left this relatively untouched, even though they are visually impressive and can be used for a secondary function of a full heal and then invincibility, giving you some breathing room to work with. Flow motion makes a return from dream drop distance, but has been neutered with what you can do with it. It's a little more restrictive from a combat and mobility perspective. This can make it a little disappointing if you're coming to this game fresh from dream drop distance, but it's useful enough, and given this game offers a lot of movement options both outside and inside combat, Flow motion offers more to the already expansive movement options. Tired of all that fighting? Are you tired of me talking about fighting? Well, good. Me too. Being an RPG with hours and hours of gameplay, there's other stuff to do in order to prevent players from getting tired of button mashing their way through combat scenarios. The first up is a cooking minigame that is led by Remy from Ratatouille. They just kind of call him Little Chef in this, but hey, whatever. Cooking is harder than it looks, requiring good timing and the ability to follow directions. It's definitely nothing you can just mindlessly go through because it does require a certain amount of paying attention. So why do this? Well, it grants you delicious food, and those meals give you stat boosts, which can then become imperative for harder fights on harder difficulties. It's a pretty practical reason to make your way to the bistro to hang out with Little Chef every couple hours of gameplay. It does require ingredients that you can find or just buy throughout your journey. Introduced around the same time are the classic Kingdom minigames, which act as a series of Disney-themed old-timey Game & Watch games that offer a cute break from the action that I could only sink a couple minutes into at a time. But it's expansive enough to give praise for just how many minigames there are, and collecting them through the worlds gives a sense of accomplishment and progress that just feels good. The last mechanic that changes the action is the fan-hated Gummi Ship. Now, I've never hated the Gummi Ship, it's never been my favorite thing, but it's been alright. I'm happy to say that I think it's been improved significantly. It's used more rarely, and the paths between worlds are opened up, so if you avoid combat and exploration altogether, getting to a brand new world takes a little over a minute to get to. And then, you can just warp to the planet whenever you want. For die-hard Gummi fans, there's a more expansive metagame to this, with an open space that is occupied with treasures to collect and enemies to blow up. There's a lot of potential here, and I can definitely see myself coming back and exploring more with a custom-made Gummi Ship that will most likely not be visually pleasing, but be like 50 cannons stuck to a cinder block. The last thing I want to talk about before starting to wrap up is our good, adorable friends, the Moogles, and everything they bring to the table here. As usual, they are in charge of our shops, which they sell us basic items and equipment. But they also give us access to the synthesis menu, which can be very overwhelming at first glance with how much you have available from the get-go. This is where you'll find the best items in the game, as you have to gather materials that let you create these endgame level items. This is nothing new to the series of Kingdom Hearts, however, what these fluffy bastards introduce us to are the photo opportunities, which are fine enough, I guess. They're laid out and require Sora to take pictures or even selfies with objects or people mentioned in the hint for each photo op. These unlock various synthesis items or just give you items straight up. However, what's more daunting are the lucky emblems. So you know how you can make a Mickey Mouse logo with one bigger circle and two smaller circles arranged like a Mickey Mouse head? Yeah, so there's like 90 symbols like that scattered through the worlds. They could be carved into an object, splattered in paint on a wall, made in the clouds, or even in an existential void. If you tell me you found all of these without a guide, I automatically assume you're yanking my chain. This is more so just frustrating than anything else. The Moogle asks you to take pictures of all 90 of these, which unlock more synthesis options, and depending on the difficulty and the amount of emblems you collect, they determine whether or not you get to see the secret ending, which is by now a staple of the series. Frustrating, but with a guide and your journal keeping track of which emblems you found, it's definitely nothing to pull your hair out over. And last but not least, we've reached the story. One of the more infamous parts of Kingdom Hearts is the extensive lore and quite frankly confusing and convoluted story. Now, Kingdom Hearts 3 is more of a nice little bow. It ties up a lot of loose ends while not creating a ton of others. Does it create some? Of course it does, but it answers more questions than it asks, and I won't be talking about that kind of stuff in this video, but Kingdom Hearts 3 is pretty easy to keep up with if you've played the other games, and been paying attention like you should. As is a staple to the series, Sora and the gang visit different Disney properties. Sorry, I meant worlds, and help the characters in those stories go through their movie-centric plots with a few exceptions. The fun twist is that members of the newly formed New Organization 13 are interfering somewhat with these worlds, and Sora isn't having any of that. Besides introducing individual members of the new organization and giving long-term fans some fan service and setup for Act 3 of the game, the Disney worlds usually have little bearing on the plot and act as fun padding between the beginning of the game and the end when the original Kingdom Hearts-iness is in full swing. During our traversal of Disney worlds, we get check-ins from the other heroes who are doing actual plot-related stuff while Sora's killing time and goofing off, until the pieces are set up for the final showdown. I will say the final 4 hours or so are so very good and feel like a good payoff to these games. And that's it as far as what I want to cover for a review goes. Like I said, I want to make a more spoilery-filled review with my thoughts, all nostalgia-based and whatnot. So subscribe if you're new and want to see that when it comes out. The only issue that really glares out at me is some pacing issues. Certain worlds seem to drag on with lots of long cutscenes taking me out of the game too often, and somehow the game feels too short, probably with how fast I played through it. The ending leaves me wanting more Kingdom Hearts, of course, and certain characters from past games are noticeably and unexplainedly absent. Final Fantasy characters. And this gives a rushed feel to Kingdom Hearts 3. A lot of my gripes are personal, but I wanted to mention them at the very least. This all brings us to a total score of a 9.2 out of 10. If you're a longtime fan who's played anywhere from half to all of the past games, I say pick it up. You'll have a blast while keeping up with the story. If you're new to the franchise, you're going to be lost, and as much fun as having new people to a fandom is, I'd hate for you to feel alienated. So I'd recommend picking up a couple of the other games first. Most of them are good in their own right, and the story is rather expansive. With Kingdom Hearts 3 being similar to something like Avengers Infinity War, it's a big payoff and feels like a big crossover event that has been built up for the last decade and a half. Anyways, that's all from me, everyone. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed, comment to say hi, and share if you want to help me get my name out there. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you all in the next one.